The first pale fingers of dawn always found me awake, painting the familiar floral wallpaper of my bedroom in hues of gray and rose. At 80 years old, you learn that sleep is a fickle guest, often leaving before the party is over. You learn to treat each sunrise as a quiet gift, a private opening night for a play you didn't know you'd be granted another ticket to see. Though, if I'm being entirely honest, some days the gift feels more like an ordeal. This was one of those days. A sharp, insistent ache in my hips announced itself, a familiar song of protest from joints that had borne the weight of 8 decades. The short walk to the kitchen for a glass of water became a carefully navigated expedition, each step a negotiation with my own body. My little house on Maplewood Avenue, once a bustling hub of life, now seemed to hold its breath in the morning quiet. It held the ghosts of 60 years of living within its walls. The wallpaper in the living room, a pattern of cheerful daisies Arthur and I had picked out together, had faded over 30 years, the flowers now muted echoes of their former selves. The wooden porch steps, which he was always gonna fix next weekend, groaned a little louder with every passing spring. Arthur. 8 years had passed since his heart had decided, without any warning, that it had beaten enough. I still talked to him, especially in these quiet mornings. The Hendersons next door got a new puppy, Arthur, I'd murmur while the coffee maker gurgled. A little golden retriever. You would have loved him. It was a silly habit, I knew, but it made the silence feel less like an absence and more like a pause, as if he'd just stepped out into the garden to check on his roses and would be back any minute for his cup. This house remembered everything. It remembered the clumsy first steps of my children, Mark and Jessica, their joyful shrieks echoing in the hallway, the faint pencil marks on the doorframe charting their growth. Now, the silence in these rooms was so profound, so absolute, that it felt as if those happy, noisy days had happened to someone else, in another life I'd only read about. Jessica, my daughter, breezed in once a month, always in a hurry, her presence a whirlwind of brief pleasantries and glances at her watch before she rushed off to her flower shop. Mark, my son, showed up more often, but his visits were almost always a prelude to a request, his hand outstretched before he even had his coat off. It was usually for money, a loan for a can't-miss investment, or an unexpected bill, or sometimes for a signature on some paperwork he needed co-signed. Every time, he'd swear on his life he'd pay it back soon. In 15 years, he had never paid back a single dime. Today was Wednesday, which meant it was blueberry pie day. Not for me. My appetite was a shadow of its former self, and a whole pie was a mountain I couldn't climb. It was for Leo, my grandson. He was the only one. The only one in this scattered family who visited just to visit, whose presence wasn't a harbinger of a favor about to be asked, but a simple, genuine desire to spend time with his old grandmother, to drink tea and talk about his college business classes. I heard the familiar, unique slam of the front gate, followed by his light but slightly clumsy footsteps on the porch. He was still not quite used to his own height, a tall, lanky frame he had inherited directly from his grandfather Arthur. It was a walk filled with youthful energy and a touch of awkwardness that always made me smile. Grandma Eleanor, his deep voice boomed from the doorway, a sound too large for my quiet house. Don't tell me. I smell a specialty of the house. I should certainly hope so, I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face as I wiped my floured hands on my apron. The simple sight of him, his bright, earnest face, was like sunshine pouring into the dusty corners of my week. Come on in, it's just cool enough to eat without burning your tongue. Leo leaned down to give me a hug, and I had to crane my neck all the way back to see his face. It was still a jarring sensation, this sudden realization of time's relentless passage. When did my little boy, whose scraped knees I used to bandage, get so big that he towered over me? How's college treating you? I asked, setting a generous slice of pie, still warm from the oven, in front of him. Still wrestling with that advanced economics class? I remember your grandfather muttering about John Maynard Keynes at the dinner table. I actually got an A on my last midterm, he said proudly, his mouth already full of pie and his eyes lighting up. It's finally starting to click. Professor Albright even asked if I'd want to assist on a research project next semester, looking into emerging market trends. I always knew you had your grandfather's brains, I said, my heart swelling with a fierce pride as I poured him a cup of steaming tea. He was so brilliant with numbers. He would be so incredibly proud of you, Leo. He always said you had a good head on your shoulders. Leo fell silent for a moment, his fork stilled over his plate. His gaze drifted out the kitchen window to the gnarled old apple tree in the backyard, its branches heavy with early summer leaves. I knew exactly what he was thinking. Arthur had taught him how to climb that very tree when he was just 7 years old, holding him steady at first, then letting go, much to Mark's loud, nervous disapproval. A boy needs to know how to fall down and get back up on his own, Mark. Arthur had just laughed, his voice a warm, reassuring rumble. That's a lesson no textbook can teach you. Grandma, Leo said suddenly, his voice pulling me back from the memory. He set his fork down with a soft clink against the plate. Have you decided what you're going to wear on Friday? I looked at him, my mind a blank. The question seemed to come out of nowhere. Friday? What's happening on Friday, dear? Leo froze, his hand hovering over his teacup. A strange, troubled look clouded his bright face, a discordant mixture of shock and utter confusion. The dinner, he said slowly, as if speaking to a child. It's Mom and Dad's 30th wedding anniversary. They have reservations at the Willow Creek Inn. Didn't Dad tell you about it? I slowly sat down in the chair across from him, a sudden, creeping chill seeping into my bones, far colder than the morning air. 30 years. A significant milestone, of course. A reason for a grand celebration. But why, I wondered, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat, why am I hearing about it for the first time from my grandson, and not from my own son? Well, I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that I did not feel, trying to protect Leo from the unease that was now coiling in my stomach like a cold snake. Maybe he was just about to call. You know your father. Always leaving things to the last minute, that one. Leo looked down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by the pattern of the china. He picked at the remaining crumbs of his pie with his fork. Yeah, he said, his voice lacking any real conviction. I guess so. We moved on to other topics. He told me about his plans for the summer, about a sweet girl named Chloe he had met at the campus library. I listened, I nodded, I asked the right questions, but my thoughts were a world away, snagged on that one, glaring omission. Why hadn't Mark called? Was it possible he was really planning a major family celebration without me? The thought was so monstrous, so alien, that I tried to push it away. It had to be a mistake. It just had to be. When Leo left, promising to stop by over the weekend, I stood at the living room window for a long time, watching him stride down the street until he turned the corner. The house, which had been filled with his youthful energy, now felt cavernously empty, the silence pressing in on me. Across the street, Mrs. Gable, a woman my own age, was playing in her front yard with her grandchildren. Her daughter brought them every Wednesday, a noisy, joyful invasion of laughter and running feet. I watched old Beatrice glowing with a happiness so pure it was almost painful to witness. I wished, with a sudden, sharp ache, that my own children could be like that. The shrill ring of the telephone interrupted my thoughts, making me jump. I glanced at the caller ID, my heart giving a little leap of hope. It was Mark. See? I told myself. You were being a silly, sentimental old fool. Of course, he was going to invite you. Mom, it's me, he said, and I immediately noticed the slight, almost imperceptible strain in his voice. Hello, darling, I answered, carefully arranging my own voice into a mask of normalcy. How are you doing? I'm fine. Listen, I'm calling about Friday, he began, and a wave of warmth and relief washed over me. I was wrong. I was wrong to think badly of him. Your father and I were planning a little anniversary dinner, he continued, but unfortunately, we're going to have to cancel it. My relief evaporated, replaced by confusion. Cancel? Why? Linda's come down with some kind of awful virus, he said, the words sounding a little too rehearsed. Fever, chills, the works. The doctor says she needs to stay in bed for at least a week, no visitors. Oh, that's terrible, I said, and the sympathy in my voice was genuine, but it was now tangled with a growing thread of suspicion. Something about his tone, his rushed explanation, felt off. It didn't ring true. Is there anything I can bring over? I make a wonderful chicken broth. No, that's okay, he interrupted, far too hastily. We have everything we need. I just wanted to let you know so you wouldn't be expecting a call. We'll reschedule as soon as she's better. We'll be sure to call you then. He hung up before I could say anything else, leaving a strange, bitter aftertaste in the air. The conversation felt like a performance, a script being read. But why would he lie? What possible reason could there be? That evening, my unease gnawing at me, I called Jessica. I kept the pretense casual, a mother checking in. I was just talking to Mark, I said after a few pleasantries. I was so sorry to hear about poor Linda. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line, a pause just long enough to be significant. Linda? Jessica repeated, her voice blank. What about her? Mark said she's quite ill. A virus. That's why they had to cancel the anniversary dinner. Another pause, this one crackling with tension. Oh. Right. That. Yes, it's terrible, she stammered, clearly caught off guard. Mom, I'm really swamped at the shop right now, getting ready for the weekend, she said impatiently, her voice suddenly brisk. If you want to know about Linda, you really should talk to Mark. But you're still going to their anniversary dinner on Friday, aren't you? I asked, my voice deliberately innocent, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The silence this time was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It stretched for an eternity. Oh, she finally managed to say, her voice tight. That. Yeah, of course. Well, you know. Listen, Mom, I really have to run. I'll talk to you later. And she was gone. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, a monotonous, mocking soundtrack to the anxiety now churning violently inside me. They were hiding something. They were both in on it. And I was determined to find out what it was. The next morning, I went to the supermarket, driven not by the need for groceries but by a desperate need to escape the suffocating silence and my own spiraling thoughts. In the produce section, as I was examining a head of lettuce with unseeing eyes, I ran into Brenda, an old acquaintance who worked at the same flower shop as Jessica. Eleanor. It's been ages, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug. We chatted for a moment about our health, the weather, the usual dance of pleasantries. I'm actually taking tomorrow off, Brenda said, beaming. Jessica is taking the evening off too, though. Some big family celebration at that fancy Willow Creek Inn, I hear. She ordered a huge centerpiece of white orchids from the shop. 30 years. That's quite a milestone, isn't it? I just nodded, a tight, artificial smile plastered on my face, feeling the ground beneath my feet tilt slightly on its axis. The world seemed to recede, the cheerful sounds of the supermarket fading to a distant buzz. So, the dinner wasn't cancelled. The orchids were ordered. The lie was complete. My own son, my own daughter, had conspired to deceive me. But why? The final, brutal confirmation came later that afternoon, when the phone rang again. It was Leo. Grandma, I'm so sorry to bother you again, but I forgot to ask, have you seen my blue notebook? The one for my economics class? I think I might have left it at your place. As I began my search, my movements slow and robotic, he kept talking, his voice a cheerful, innocent counterpoint to the storm raging inside me. If you find it, can you give it to Dad tomorrow when he comes? He's picking you up, right? Around 5? I froze in the middle of the living room, the phone pressed hard against my ear, the plastic cool against my heated skin. Picking me up, dear? Yeah, for the dinner at the Willow Creek, he said, completely oblivious to the devastation his words were causing. I could swing by and get it if you want, but I have a class that runs until 6, and I'm afraid I'll be late for the start. I gripped the receiver tighter, my knuckles white, my breath caught in my throat. Leo, honey, I said, amazed at how calm and normal my voice sounded. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your father called me yesterday. He told me the dinner was cancelled. Your mother is sick, remember? The silence on his end was deafening, a vacuum of confusion. Grandma, he said finally, his own voice now small and uncertain. I don't understand. Dad called me an hour ago, just to confirm that I could be at the restaurant by 7. He said he was looking forward to it. Nobody cancelled anything. I sank into the nearest armchair, the strength draining from my legs, the carefully constructed facade of my life crumbling around me. That's how it is. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. I wasn't just forgotten in the rush of planning. I was a problem that had been solved with a lie. I was a guest who had been deliberately, meticulously, uninvited. Grandma? Are you okay? Leo's voice, laced with a genuine concern that was a knife to my heart, pulled me back. Yes, dear, I'm perfectly fine, I managed to say, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. I must have misunderstood him. You know how it is at my age, things get jumbled sometimes. I'm sure it's just some silly mix-up. Do you want me to call Dad and find out? He offered, ever the protector. No. I answered, far too quickly. No, there's no need for that, honey. I'll talk to him myself. Don't you worry about a thing. After I hung up, I sat in the armchair for what felt like hours, staring at the family portrait on the mantelpiece. Me, Arthur, and the 2 smiling children who had grown into strangers. When did it happen? When did I become a burden? An inconvenience to be managed with cheap, easily dismantled lies? A hot, bitter wave of resentment washed over me, so powerful it almost made me gasp. But I forced myself to breathe through it, deep and slow. Now was not the time for tears. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. Now was the time to think. If my children had decided they no longer wanted me at their family celebration, then I had become a stranger to them. And I needed to understand why. I walked with a new, firm purpose to the old secretary desk in the corner, the place where I kept all my important papers. Among them were Arthur's will, the insurance policies, and the deed to the house. Mark had hinted for years, with increasing frequency, that I should sign the house over to him, for your own safety, Mom. Jessica had suggested, more than once, that I sell it and move into a nice nursing home. They'll take better care of you there, Mom. It would be a load off our minds. I had always refused, sensing a cold, grasping avarice behind their feigned concern. Now, I thought, as I pulled the thick folder from the drawer, I was beginning to realize what it truly was. The phone rang again that evening. This time, it was my daughter-in-law, Linda. The sick, bedridden woman. Her voice was offensively cheerful and energetic. Eleanor, honey. Wesley told me you called. Just wanted to let you know I'm feeling a tiny bit better, but still so weak. I'm so glad to hear it, I said, my voice a marvel of self-control. I was just telling Jessica how sorry I was that the big celebration had to be cancelled. That's right, she confirmed, too quickly, too eagerly. This virus, it just knocked me right off my feet. The doctor prescribed strict bed rest for at least a week. Well, you take care of yourself, I said. And say hello to the others for me. The others? I could practically hear the panic in her voice. Oh, yes, of course, Leo and Jessica, they are all just so very upset that the party is off. I hung up the phone and looked out at the sky, now a deep, bruised purple. They hadn't even bothered to coordinate their lies properly. It was insulting. I walked to my closet and pulled out a dark blue dress, a simple, elegant sheath that I hadn't worn since Arthur's funeral. I held it up against myself and looked in the mirror. It still fit, though I seemed to have shrunk over the years. If my children thought they could simply edit me out of their lives, like an inconvenient sentence in their perfect story, they were sorely mistaken. Eleanor Vance had not yet said her last word. And tomorrow night promised to be very, very interesting indeed. I was awake all night, but not because of the familiar ache in my joints, though that was certainly present. I was awake because my mind was a whirlwind, replaying every conversation, every lie, every nuance of their deception. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, my children, gathered around a polished table in a fancy restaurant, laughing, raising their glasses, telling each other how lucky they were to be rid of their burdensome old mother for the evening. The thought was a physical pain. Friday morning dawned gray and overcast, heavy clouds hanging over Blue Springs, a perfect reflection of my mood. I made myself a cup of tea, but it went cold on the counter, untouched. Something inside me felt frozen, coiled, waiting for a decision I had not yet fully articulated, even to myself. What would I do tonight? Would I stay home, as they had so carefully arranged, and let their lie become my reality? Or... My gaze fell on Arthur's photograph on the mantelpiece. He was looking at me with that slight, knowing smile, his head tilted just so, a gesture that always meant he was about to say something wise. "What would you do, Arthur?" I whispered to the silent image. And I could almost hear his answer, his voice a warm, steady presence in the quiet room. "Don't you dare let them trample on your dignity, Eleanor. You deserve better than that." A steely resolve settled over me, cold and clear. I went to the window. Outside, Mrs. Gable was walking her little dachshund. When she saw me, she waved with a bright, genuine smile. I waved back, a lump forming in my throat as I thought about how few people were left in my life who were actually happy to see me. The phone rang, snapping me out of my musings. It was Mark. "Mom, good morning," he said, his voice suspiciously cheerful. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, dear," I answered, my voice a carefully constructed imitation of my usual tone. "How is poor Linda? Any better?" There was a second's pause, and I could almost picture him frantically trying to recall which version of the lie he was supposed to be telling. "No, about the same, I'm afraid," he finally said. "Still lying down with that fever. The doctor said it might be a while." "That's such a shame," I said with exaggerated sympathy. "I was just thinking of baking her one of my chicken pot pies and bringing it over. Nothing like a home-cooked meal when you're under the weather." "No," he answered, far too loud, far too fast. "No, you don't have to do that, Mom. We have everything, really. I was just calling to see if you needed anything. Maybe you're out of your medication?" So that's what this was. Checking up on me. Making sure the old woman was safely tucked away in her house, not planning on going anywhere while they celebrated without her. "Thank you for thinking of me, son, but I have everything I need," I replied sweetly. "I think I'm just going to spend a quiet evening reading. I've been wanting to reread an old Agatha Christie for ages." "That's a great idea, Mom," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "Okay, well, I have to run. Call if you need anything." I hung up the phone and looked at the clock. 10 in the morning. There was still plenty of time before their dinner. Plenty of time to think about how things had gotten to this point. I pulled an old, leather-bound notebook out of the secretary desk, the one where I had meticulously, painfully, written down all of Wesley's loans over the past 15 years. Each entry was a small monument to my own foolish hope. $500, car repairs. $1,000, leaky roof. $2,000, promising investment. A small fortune, a sum he would never pay back, and we both knew it. Then there was the matter of my health. 6 months ago, the doctor had prescribed a new, expensive medication for my blood pressure. Mark had thrown a fit. $400 a month for pills, Mom? That's insane. We have to find a cheaper alternative. I tried to explain that the other medications didn't work, that I had allergies, but he wouldn't listen, backed up by Jessica. This, from a man who bragged about his new Lexus, from a woman who vacationed in the Bahamas. My thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. It was Audrey, Leo's girlfriend, a sweet, shy girl with a spray of freckles across her nose. She'd come to look for Leo's notebook. As I made her a cup of tea, she looked at the photos on the wall. "Is that Leo as a child?" she asked, pointing to a picture of a 5-year-old boy proudly holding a tiny fish. Yes, his first fishing trip with his grandfather, I smiled. Audrey laughed, and for a moment, the house felt young and alive again. As she was leaving, she turned in the doorway. I'll see you tonight, right? Leo said you'd be at the Willow Creek too. I forced a strained smile. We'll see, dear. I have a bit of a headache. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it. After she left, the decision, which had been simmering all day, finally came to a boil. I looked at my watch. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. Dinner was still 5 hours away. Plenty of time to get ready. I pulled out the dark blue dress I'd tried on the day before. The low-heeled shoes I'd worn to Jessica's wedding. The single strand of pearls Arthur had given me for our 30th anniversary. I was not going to sit at home and feel sorry for myself. I was not going to let them erase me. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to make sure, with my own eyes, that this was not some terrible misunderstanding, but a conscious, deliberate choice on their part. At 5 o'clock, I hailed a cab. The Willow Creek Inn, I told the young driver, who looked at me with some surprise. Really, Grandma? That place is pricey. I am aware of the prices, young man, I said firmly. And I am not your grandmother. He shrugged and fell silent. The Willow Creek Inn was on the outskirts of town, a beautiful 2-story red brick building nestled in a grove of trees by the river, its windows glowing with warm, inviting light. I had the driver stop a short distance away. Wait for me here, please, I said, handing him more than enough money. I won't be long. I walked around to the side of the building, to the guest parking lot. And there they were. Mark's silver Lexus. Jessica's red Ford. Leo's old, beat-up Honda. They were all here. The pain of that final, irrefutable confirmation was so sharp it stole my breath away for a moment. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They had simply decided to celebrate their family without me. I crept slowly to the windows of the main dining room. The curtains were mostly drawn, but one was askew, leaving a narrow, vertical gap. I stood in the deep shadows of the trees, a ghost at their feast, and watched my family through that gap. They were sitting at a large, round table in the center of the room. Mark, at the head, looking expansive and proud. Linda, next to him, radiant and perfectly healthy in a new burgundy dress. Jessica and her husband, Leo and Audrey, and a few other people I didn't recognize, friends of Mark and Linda's, no doubt. They were laughing. They were raising glasses of champagne. The waiter brought out a massive, tiered platter of chilled seafood, then another with some sort of elaborate roast. On the table were bottles of expensive French wine. I knew the prices at this restaurant. One dinner like this cost as much as my entire monthly budget. We're tight on money, Mom. These medications are too expensive, Mom. All this time, they had been lying to me, pleading poverty, begging me for money for fabricated emergencies, while they spent hundreds, thousands of dollars on a lifestyle I couldn't even imagine. I watched Mark raise his glass in a toast. Everyone laughed and applauded. Linda kissed him on the cheek. I saw Leo looking around the table, a slight frown on his face, as if he sensed someone was missing. He leaned over to Audrey and asked her something. She shook her head. At that moment, the waiter brought out a huge, 3-tiered cake with lit candles. Everyone clapped and cheered. Mark put his arm around Linda. They kissed. 30 years. 30 years together, and they hadn't found a place at the table for the woman who had given birth to and raised their family's patriarch. I felt a single, hot tear trace a path down my cold cheek. I brushed it away with an angry, irritated gesture. Now was not the time for tears. Now was the time for decisions. Stepping away from the window, I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the main entrance of the restaurant. A young man in a smart uniform stood at the door. "Good evening, ma'am," he said politely. "Do you have a reservation?" "I am here to see the Thornberry family," I answered, my voice steady and firm. They are celebrating their wedding anniversary. He checked the list on his clipboard. Yes, they are in the main hall. Are you, He hesitated, looking at me questioningly. I am Wesley Thornberry's mother, I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even me. Edith Thornberry. Oh. My deepest apologies, Mrs. Thornberry, he said, his demeanor instantly becoming more respectful. Please, come right in. Your family is already here. My family, I thought bitterly as I entered the restaurant's spacious, elegant lobby. The family that doesn't want to see me. The family that lies to my face. But in just a moment, they would see me. And it would be a night they would remember for a very, very long time. Because Edith Thornberry is not the kind of woman you can just throw out of your life like an old, unwanted thing. And it was long past time my children realized that. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and strode resolutely toward the main hall doors. Standing at the threshold of the main hall, I paused for a moment, the sounds of merriment, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses, washing over me. One more step, and I would shatter their perfect, false evening. I could still turn around, walk away with what was left of my dignity, and let them have their lie. But something inside me, some steel thread of self-respect that had been dormant for too long, wouldn't let me. I am not one to back down. I never have been. But I wasn't going to burst in there like a fury. That would be too easy, too predictable. They would dismiss me as a hysterical old woman. No. I wanted this evening to be a lesson. Mrs. Thornberry, a voice behind me made me flinch. I turned to find a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and kind, attentive eyes. He wore an impeccably tailored dark suit, with a small gold pin in the shape of a willow branch on his lapel, the restaurant's symbol. Louis? I whispered, my mind reeling. Louis Quinlan? It couldn't be. The shy boy from across the street who used to come over to borrow books and devour my blueberry pies was the owner of the most successful restaurant in town. He smiled, bowing slightly. I'm glad to see you remember me, Edith. You haven't changed a bit. Oh, Louis, that's not true, and you know it, I said, a small, genuine smile finally touching my lips. But you have become even more beautiful, he replied, with a courtly gallantry that felt wonderfully old-fashioned. Are you alone? I thought you were with your son's party. So, he knew. I felt a lump form in my throat. I couldn't lie to him. I wasn't invited, Louis, I said quietly. My son told me the dinner was cancelled. The genuine indignation that flared in his eyes was a balm to my wounded spirit. There must be some mistake, he said firmly. He couldn't have. He could, I interrupted softly. And he did. Louis's face hardened. That is unacceptable, he said, his voice low and firm. He offered me his arm. Allow me, Edith. The mother of the guest of honor should not be standing in the hallway. He led me to the doors of the main hall. How do you want to do this? He asked. A grand entrance, or a quiet one? Quietly, I said. Like the honored guest I was supposed to be. He nodded. Elegance is always more effective than drama. He opened the doors, and we stepped inside. The room was a sea of white flowers and crystal. My family's table was in the very center. Wesley was in the middle of a toast, something about family values and mutual support. Louis led me straight to their table. We walked slowly, with a dignity that commanded attention. Reed saw me first. His eyes widened, and he half rose from his chair. Then Audrey. Then Jessica, her wine glass freezing halfway to her lips. Finally, Wesley, sensing the sudden chill in the atmosphere, turned. His voice died in his throat. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Louis stepped forward. I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Thornberry, he said, his voice impeccably polite but edged with steel. It seems your mother was a little late for the celebration. I took the liberty of escorting her to your table. There was a silence so thick you could have cut it with a knife. "Mom," Wesley finally choked out, his face as white as the tablecloth. "But, you said you'd stay home." "I changed my mind," I said calmly, as Louis pulled out a chair for me. "I decided I wanted to congratulate my son and daughter-in-law on 30 years of marriage. It's an important date." Louis departed, promising to send over another appetizer and a bottle of his best champagne, on the house, of course. We were left in a tableau of suffocating silence. "Mom," Wesley began, his voice falsely hearty, "what a surprise. We thought you weren't feeling well." "I feel fine," I answered, looking him straight in the eye. Cora, on the other hand, seems to have recovered surprisingly quickly. "This morning, you had such a high fever." Cora blushed and lowered her eyes. I felt better by lunchtime," she murmured. "A miracle." "Truly a miracle," I nodded. "Especially since Doris Simmons saw you at the supermarket yesterday, looking perfectly healthy." Jessica slammed her glass down on the table. "Mom," she hissed, "maybe we shouldn't." "Shouldn't what, dear?" I turned to her. "Tell the truth? I seem to recall you teaching your own son that lying is wrong." A waiter arrived with an extra place setting, his presence a brief, welcome respite from the tension. "Grandma," Reed said quietly, leaning toward me, "I didn't know." "I swear." "I know, sweetheart," I whispered back, squeezing his hand under the table. "This is not your fault." "Well," Wesley said, clearing his throat and trying to regain control, "now that we're all here, let's get on with the party." "Yes," I said, looking around the lavishly decorated table. "I can see how modestly you're celebrating. Especially for people with such financial difficulties. Isn't that why you asked me for $2,000 last month for car repairs, Wesley?" One of the guests, a friend of Cora's, coughed into her napkin. "Mom," Wesley gritted through a forced smile, "can't we discuss this later? In a family circle?" "Aren't we in a family circle?" I asked with wide-eyed innocence. "Or am I no longer considered part of the family? I must have missed that memo." "Of course you're part of the family," Jessica interjected, her voice too loud, too false. "We just thought it would be tiring for you, at your age." "Ah, my age," I repeated slowly. "Interesting that it didn't stop me from watching your cats last month while you went on a spa weekend. Or lending your brother $2,000 he never paid back." The silence returned, heavier this time. I looked at my children, at their tense, guilty faces. "I didn't come here to make a scene," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I came here to understand. To understand when my children turned into people who could lie to their own mother's face, who could exclude her from a family celebration like some inconvenient piece of old furniture." I paused, letting my words sink in. I wanted to understand why. And sitting here, I think I do. I pulled a plain white envelope from my purse and placed it on the table. They all stared at it as if it were a ticking bomb. "You think I'm a helpless old woman," I said. "You've been discussing my deteriorating condition, looking into nursing homes, talking to realtors about selling my house. You've been waiting for me to either die or become so senile that you can take over." I opened the envelope and pulled out a set of documents. "You see, you underestimated me. You thought I didn't see your neglect, that I didn't understand your motives. But I have. And I have made some decisions of my own." I took out the first document and placed it on the table. "I sold the house," I said simply. There was a collective, sharp intake of breath. You what?" Wesley stammered. "I sold it 3 days ago. To a lovely young couple with 2 children. They're going to breathe new life into it." "But, what about the money?" Jessica whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "Ah, the money," I smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time that night. I slid a second document across the table. "I've donated it. All of it. To build a new children's wing for the city library. It will be named in your father's honor." Wesley looked as if he had been physically struck. You gave it all away?" But, our inheritance. Jessica cried. Your inheritance, I said, my voice turning cold as ice, was the love and the values I tried to give you. You seem to have misplaced those. So, I'm giving something to children who might still appreciate it. I then took out the final document. I've also updated my will, I said, my gaze sweeping over their stunned, devastated faces. Everything I have left, my personal savings, my jewelry, my belongings, I am leaving to Reed. I placed the copy of the will on the table. To the only member of this family who has consistently treated me not as a source of future inheritance, but as a human being. Reed looked up, tears streaming down his face. Grandma, no, I don't want. I know you don't, sweetheart, I said softly, reaching for his hand. And that is precisely why you are getting it. I stood up then, my back straight, my head held high. I have said everything I came to say. Please, enjoy the rest of your party. I turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving them in the ruins of their perfect, expensive evening. Louis was waiting for me at the door. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was new, uncertain, and for the first time in a very long time, it was entirely my own. 3 months later, I was sitting in a comfortable armchair in my new, sun-drenched apartment, a cup of morning tea in my hand, watching the city of Blue Springs come to life from my third-floor window. The change hadn't been easy. Leaving the house I had lived in for nearly 60 years, the house where every corner held a memory of Arthur, was a wrenching experience. But this small, bright apartment, with its light-colored walls and minimal, carefully chosen belongings, had given me a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Wesley. The 4th call this week. I let it go to voicemail. After that night at the Willow Creek, it was as if my children had suddenly woken up from a long, selfish slumber. At first, there had been angry, incredulous phone calls. How could you do this? Sell the house? Disinherit us? Then, when they realized their anger was having no effect, they had shifted tactics, trying to ingratiate themselves. Wesley would arrive at my door with bouquets of flowers and a hangdog expression, talking about the terrible misunderstanding, and how much they truly loved me. Jessica called every day, offering to help me set up my new apartment, inviting me to lunch. Even Cora had sent a lavish fruit basket with a cloying apology card. I hadn't rejected their attempts at reconciliation outright. I had simply kept my distance, accepting their gifts with a polite, cool smile, but making no move to re-establish our old relationship. They needed to understand that trust, once so thoroughly shattered, doesn't magically rebuild itself overnight. Besides, I understood all too well the real reason for their sudden, desperate concern. They hoped, against all evidence, that I hadn't yet had time to finalize the donation to the library, that maybe it was just a threat. Wesley had even cautiously wondered if I'd been too hasty in my decision. When I had confirmed that the deal was finalized and the money had already been transferred to the library's building fund, his face had changed, the mask of concern falling away for a fraction of a second, revealing the raw, calculating greed beneath. The phone rang again. This time, it was Leo. Good morning, Grandma, his cheerful voice boomed. How are you today? Good morning, honey, I smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. I'm beautiful as always. I was just admiring the view from my window and thinking about the day ahead. Did you remember that today is the grand opening of the new wing of the library? I could hear the excitement in his voice. Of course, I remembered. I glanced at the dark blue dress I had laid out for the ceremony. It's all ready. After a brief, happy conversation with Leo, I went back to my tea. The opening of the new wing was an important event for me. The Arthur Thornberry Wing, it would be called. A place where children could discover the world of books, just as Arthur had once done. He would be happy, knowing his name was associated with something so meaningful and enduring. After finishing my tea, I got ready for my morning shift at the library. 3 times a week, I volunteered in the children's department. I read fairy tales to the little ones, helped older students with their book reports, and sometimes just talked to teenagers who came to the library not so much for books as for the quiet and understanding they lacked at home. This work gave me a sense of purpose, of being needed, that I had been deprived of for so long. The children looked at me not as a burden, not as a source of inheritance, but as a person who could give them something: knowledge, attention, kindness. On my way to the library, I met Martha Finch, my new friend and neighbor, an energetic widow in her 70s. We had bonded over our shared love of gardening and classic films. After that night at the restaurant, news of my donation had spread like wildfire through the small town of Blue Springs. People's reactions had been varied. Some thought I was a hero. Some thought I was a crazy old woman who had cruelly disinherited her own children. But I didn't care. I knew I had done the right thing. At the library, preparations for the opening ceremony were in full swing. The head librarian, Miss Apprentice, rushed over when she saw me. "Edith. How good of you to come. We need your help selecting the first books to be displayed on the new shelves." I spent the next few hours happily sorting through stacks of books, from classic fairy tales to contemporary stories. It was an enjoyable task, reminding me of the times I used to read to Wesley and Jessica before bed. The memories of my children no longer caused the same acute, stabbing pain. I had accepted the situation for what it was. They had not grown up to be the people I had hoped they would be, but they were still my children, and on some fundamental level, I still loved them. It was just that now, that love was more detached, free from the weight of illusions or expectations. The ceremony began in the late afternoon. The mayor gave a standard speech, then Miss Apprentice spoke about how my donation had made their long-held dream a reality. And then, she invited me to the stage. To a round of applause, I walked up to the podium. "Good afternoon, friends," I began, my voice clear and steady. "This wing is named in honor of my husband, Arthur Thornberry, a man who loved two things more than anything: his family and books." I paused, my gaze sweeping over the crowd, landing for a moment on Wesley and Cora, who were standing near the stage, their faces tense. "My hope," I continued, "is that this new wing will be a place where the children of Blue Springs can find books that will change their lives. And where they will realize that the most important things in life are not material possessions, but knowledge, love, and kindness." Sometimes, we forget these simple truths. But it's never too late to remember. It's never too late to change. After the ceremony, as I was chatting with some of the parents, Lewis Quinlan approached me. "I've been thinking," he said, his smile warm and genuine. "They're doing King Lear at the town theater next weekend. I have 2 tickets, but my sister had to cancel. Would you do me the honor of keeping me company?" I looked at him, surprised and touched by the invitation. "I would love to, Lewis," I replied, a feeling of light, youthful excitement fluttering in my chest. A few days later, as I was leaving my apartment to meet Lewis for the play, Thelma was sitting on the bench in front of the driveway, waiting for me. She held a bouquet of flowers, not a store-bought arrangement, but one she had clearly made herself. "Mom," she said, her voice uncertain. I owe you an apology. For that night, and for all these years. I know trust has to be earned back. But I want to try. I want to be a part of your life again. A real part." For the first time in a long time, I saw sincerity in my daughter's eyes. I saw not just the middle-aged woman she had become, but the little girl who had once come to me with all her joys and sorrows. "I'd like that too, Thelma," I said at last. "But you're right. Trust has to be rebuilt. Gradually. Day by day." We talked for a long time that evening, a real conversation, the first in years. When she left, promising to come back over the weekend, I stood at my window, looking out at the sparkling lights of the city. My new life was just beginning. A life in which I was not just a mother, a grandmother, a widow, but above all, myself. Edith Thornberry. A woman with so much to look forward to.